Good morning, everybody. Something a little different today. If you've been following my channel for a while, you might be here for art journaling content, for the weekly Spark videos, for different mixed media, things like that. And one of my goals in this crazy year of 2025 is to have more videos up that show some of the other things that I do. I was doing my morning pages this morning and I was feeling a little overwhelmed with all of the different materials and mediums that I work in, but I love them all. And I really love when I can put them together. And so with that goal in mind, I wanted to do a video today introducing some of the seed bead work that I do. If you're just interested in my work, then you can skip ahead and just pick and choose little bits of this video so that you can see the process. If you are wanting to try doing a bead embroidered pendant, then this video is for you. I'm actually doing an online bead show this week with my friend Marcia Neal Studio, and I adore her cabochons. I like to pair them with gemstones. I make cabochons of my own in clay that are some of the similar motifs to my tiles. And I thought, what better tool to offer to potential customers, other people in the beading community that might want to get started out trying this, but kind of an introductory level how-to video on how to do a bead embroidered setting. So I'm going to start 2 of them, so that in part 2, when I do more embellishments, I can have some different options to show you. But I'm going to go through materials and techniques. I'm going to zoom the camera in as close as I can. Please forgive the state of my hands. I do work in clay most of the time, and so I've tried to moisturize and do as much as I can, but my hands are kind of rough. So yeah, something a little bit different, another passion of mine. Seed beads are so meditative when you're in the process and when you're doing each stitch per bead. It's a very mindful and calming thing, I find, and it's one that I need to do every so often for just those reasons. To sit down, to settle in, to pause a beat, and to really enjoy the materials and enjoy the process and be kind of slow and mindful. So hopefully that will interest you. As always, please feel free to subscribe to the channel, to like this video. Helps with the algorithm. I greatly appreciate it. So if you're looking for weekly Spark art journaling content, you are in the right place, and that will be out on Wednesdays like normal. But if you're interested in some of the other things that I do, stay tuned. I'm going to flip the camera around, drink some more of my coffee, and get started on a bead embroidered pendant. So first, a word about materials. There are as many ways to do this as there are people doing this. Well, okay, maybe that's a slight exaggeration, but with all techniques and materials, there are so many options. I'm going to show you the things that I prefer. These are not the only or the correct way. These are my correct way. This is my choice. These are my chosen materials. The first thing that I want to introduce you to is Lacy's Stiff Stuff, and this is, that would be Avalon shaking the table. This is your beading foundation, and it's like a stiff Pellon or a stiff felt. You can sew right through it. It's very easy to color with like a permanent marker. I know some people dye theirs, but I just use the marker around the edges of a piece. And so I'm going to show you my cabochons, and then I'm actually going to glue them down onto this substrate. I will trim it, of course, into a manageable kind of piece to hold on to. But these are going to be relatively simple pendants and not too huge. The first one that I'm going to start with is a very simple ceramic cabochon of mine with this raven head on the purple background. You can see the depth of it varies based on the sculpt, based on where the raven head is. And so we'll address that when we do the bezel. The back is flat and is going to be glued down. The second one that I'm going to work with is a crescent moon of mine. I do have one of Marcia's that I'm going to start, but I'm not gluing it today. So we've got this swirly crescent moon in this glaze that I adore. It's been discontinued. It has gold flecks in it. And I'm actually going to partner this with a vintage cabochon that looks like Starry Sky. And so I'm going to be doing the beaded bezel for the larger piece first, and we'll talk about this in part 2 of the video when we do more embellishments. I'm not going to do anything on black because I want you to be able to see what I am doing. So I will have to tint or color the back of this later on. Now, I just guesstimated that and eyeballed that this is going to be a really simple piece, so I don't need a lot of room to stitch around and do a lot of embellishments. So that works for that one. Pro tip that one of my teachers taught me, just snip the very corners off, because your thread often gets caught on those when you're trying to sew, when you're sewing the beads on, and that little change in shape really does facilitate the beading as we progress. Okay. Second piece, I want to give myself a slightly larger kind of oblong shape. I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to do with it or how much embellishment I'm going to do. And so I'm going to glue that one up there. That leaves me room. Is it going to go vertically, horizontally? How close is it going to go? I'm not going to glue that one down until I have the beaded bezel finished on the larger focal. So, you know, maybe it's down here and there's something else in the middle. I'm not sure where we're going with that. So, set that aside for now. So the glue that I use is E6000. I tend to use it in the small tubes because they're convenient to have on the bead table. They fit on your tray of beads that you see over here. So they're very easy to take your work with you. But also, I'm going to use this up before it has a chance to dry out. I mean, it's practical. I do have a larger tube down in the ceramic studio for other things, but I use the small tube on the beading table up here. Circle around and dot in the middle. Give that some good pressure. One of the reasons why I do not glaze the back of my cabochons, A, it's easier to just be able to set them on the kiln shelf. B, it gives you a rougher surface that is a little easier for kind of taking the glue and gluing it down to your substrate. This cabochon is about the same thickness as the Raven was. And what we're going to be doing, building the bezel, is it's going to come up the sides, and then we're going to cinch it in a little bit so that it curves over the top. So this is just like if you were doing a metal bezel in sterling, how you would want it to fold over the edge of the stone just a little bit. That holds it in securely. Now, stones aren't usually glued, so it's that bezel being cinched in that really does set the stone. The glue here is our backup, but the beads are going to cinch the cabochon in as well. While that glue is drying, let me talk to you about this. This is my thread of choice, and some people love it, some people hate it. It is the thickness of like a few hairs. This is a 6-pound weight, and it comes in a smoke color, so that's kind of gray. For this video, it's going to show up nicely on this white stiff stuff so that you can see what I'm doing, but I find that this smoke color is pretty invisible and disappears into my beadwork unless I'm doing things in white or very pale pastels. They do make this. Bead Smith does make this in a crystal color, which is white, and I do have a spool of that for if, if the color palette requires. Yes, it's kind of fishing line. I don't like to use any regular fishing line from my Cabela's or whatnot because a lot of the formulas have changed, and the fishing lines do biodegrade over time. which is great if there's a broken line that ends up staying in a body of water, but that's not great if it's going to be in my bead embroidery piece that I want to last a lifetime. So I make sure to buy the Fireline that is Bead Smith branded. I would say check your local craft store, check your local beading store if you have a brick and mortar. Otherwise, there are plenty of places that you can buy this online. It does come in different weights. This is kind of in the middle. I've used 4-pound before. I think I've used 8-pound before, but I think this is I know this is my preferred weight. It's fine enough that I can go through beads multiple times as the stitches warrant, and strong enough that I'm confident in my piece lasting well into the future with plenty of wear and tear. I have no idea what make bead needle I have. You can get them in long or short versions. I'll do some research. I think that I'm using a number 10 short. They might be called sharps. So when I edit this video, I'll make sure to put all that information in the comments below. Bead-wise, I am going to be doing the most of the bezel with size 8 delicas. And I have them from all over bead stores, from here to California and back, from friends who used to sell seed beads at shows, from buyouts of people's inventory that weren't doing beading anymore. So again, I'll put some of my favorite links down below, but I have no idea where some of these beads came from. I also used to work at a bead store in San Diego for a while before I moved back east, so I even have beads from there. These are size 11s, and these are delicas, which means the beads themselves are shaped like a cylinder. So many seed beads are round. The delicas are just a little bit different in that they are cylindrical, and that makes this stitch a little easier because they're really going to lock into shape when we start doing this bezel. So I'm not sure if you can tell that they're cylindrical, but I'm doing the best I can with these tiny, tiny size 11s. I also have pulled out some black size 11s because I'm doing purple and black for this bezel. And then I pulled out some 15s. And these are round, but they are a size smaller. With seed beads, the higher the number, the smaller the bead. And these are going to be used when I change that bezel and make it really cinch around the cab. So more on that in a bit. I'm going to set my crescent moon aside for now. So I usually cut off a length of my Fireline that is 1 arm's length and a little more. So it's not a full 2-arm spread. I think that's too long. That's going to get tangled up. That's going to be a pain when you're trying to pull through with each stitch. But I like to have a little bit of length to it. Now, I don't know if you saw that threaded on the first go. That's one of the reasons why I like Fireline, because it is a very kind of uniform thread. Some bead threads are like, they call this a braided, microfused braided bead thread, and other bead threads, are definitely more braided. They can fray at the end when you are trying to thread them, and you have to stretch them or wax the threads. And I've used, Ceylon, Eslon, all different fibers like that. If you're a beader, that makes sense to you. If not, don't worry about it. And I find I get a lot more tangles. Also, if I want to take a stitch out, this is so easy to unthread the needle and then rethread it. With some of those other threads, it can be really frustrating to try and rethread the needle again. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to come back with a slightly different setup so that you can see a little bit closer what exactly is happening when I start the beads. Okay, I'm ready to start if the dog cooperates. I'm tied a knot in the end of my thread and I'm going to come up not too close. I want to give myself a little breathing room. I'm going to string 4 beads. And I'm laying them down right next to the side of the cabochon. I want to scooch them down to the end of the thread. And this first row is a back stitch row. So 4 beads on. I'm going to come up and go back through 3 of those. Now this first row, it really helps if you have an even number of beads. And so for each consecutive stitch, I'm going to add 2 beads. And then I'll backstitch through 3. And that just keeps them secure, it keeps everything lined up smoothly, so I don't have a gap between stitches. There's my needle coming up. Back through 3. Oops, that's back through 4. All right, that's okay. If that's going to make it a secure stitch, that's not a problem. As long as I'm consistently keeping the bead stitches to 2, then I know I get an even count. That's going to make the second row so much easier. So I'm going to pause here and I'm going to finish this backstitch row, and I will catch up with you again when I come to the end, when we can talk about if my even number gave me the right spacing, if things are filled in right, and then how do we step up and start the second row when the stitch is going to change a little bit. All right, so I'm approaching the end. I think I can get 4 beads in here, which will keep my numbers even. I'll also show you another thing that went wrong. There we go, great. Let me finish this stitch and then I'll back up and show you. So that is perfect even numbers. Now when I backstitch through this, I want to go back through 3 beads from the last stitch where I was coming from, But I'm going to go through like 5 beads, right? Because then that's going to put me into, oh, that's more than 5. That might be like 9. So these 3 here was the last stitch, and then these beads here were the beginning of the circle. So I'm going to end up coming out a few beads into where the circle began, right? So I'm not right there at the end. Now here's what I wanted to show you. Whoops. I didn't let the glue dry. I just picked it up and started to immediately bead. So I'm going to re-glue it and pause here and actually give it time to dry. Do as I say, not as I do. I'll get it wiggled right back in there in that ring. And when we come back, we will start the second row of beads, which really starts the peyote stitch. That's the kind of stitch that has, 2 different alternating rows. They lock together like zipper teeth, and it's going to quickly enable us to build up the side of the bezel so that we can cover up the side of this piece and then also have that, decorative setting. So pausing there for now because I was eager and jumped the gun. So stay tuned. We'll be back. Okay. Picking it back up now that the glue is dry, and this next step is going to look a little confusing. I'm going to try and get this to be as clear as I can on camera, but the next row is going to not be solid beads. It's going to alternate. So I've picked up a bead. So here is where my thread is coming out. I'm going to skip this bead and go through the next bead. Oops, not 2 of them, just 1. If you can think about the roof line of a medieval castle, how there are those crenellations, right, that the archers would stand between, in a way, that's what we're doing. Now, as we go around, they're not going to sit where they need to. This one's kind of floppy. It's fallen over. Don't let that bother you. You want to keep your tension pretty tight, but don't worry about it being super, super tight, because this first row of establishing the peyote stitch is a little wonky, and the second row as we go around, everything is going to lock in place really lovely. So I've picked up a bead, I skip a bead, and I go through a bead. My thread's coming out right there, so I skip that bead and go through the next bead. So I'm actually letting them kind of lay down against the stiff stuff so that you can see them. And when I do the next row, like I said, zipper teeth, they're all going to lock into place and start coming up the side of the ceramic cabochon. So I skip a bead here and go through a bead next to it. There are methods of doing a beaded bezel where people will work with larger beads. They might even start with a row of size 8s. And they might not do this peyote stitch bezel. That's great. They look lovely, but that's not my preference. I really like the look of the peyote bezel, and I really like the security of how these beads are going to hold this piece in. mean, as you saw, I started beading too early. My glue wasn't dry, and my cabochon popped right up off my stiff stuff. So, I mean, that's not something that I want to happen after a customer buys a piece. It's not something I want to have happen to a piece of my own that I'm wearing. So this security of the peyote stitch bezel is also lovely. You can see how much faster this row is going than the last. That bead was kind of sideways. Like I said about the tension, I want to get things at least going in the right direction. Even if they're a little loose, they will tighten up when I do the next row. But I'm keeping an eye on them so that I see that they are in the right place, oriented in the right direction. Skip a bead, go through a bead. I'm filming this with the phone just a few inches above my hands, hoping that I can get the focus to be more consistent instead of trying to hold things up to you. If I need to, I can edit things in and zoom in a little bit. But I was hoping that this white stiff stuff and this smoke gray thread would show up, make things a little more visible for you. I'm sure there are quite a few tutorials online with different approaches to doing a peyote stitch bezel. So why watch mine? Well, I hope that I'm mildly entertaining. I hope that I think part 2 will be more interesting when I do my style embellishments around the bezel when it's completed. So yeah, you'll have to stay tuned for that. Let me know what you think. I would love to hear in the comments if you have done beadwork, if you think this looks fascinating, if you think this looks tedious. I thought, Avalon says tedious. I thought it would be extremely tedious, and then the first time I tried it, I fell in love. Okay, now here we are. I will zoom in on this one. If I skipped a bead and go through the next bead, well, that's the first of my sticking up row of beads. That's great. And so this is going to look a little different and be a little simpler as I go around. This is basically stepping up to the next row because I'm going to be putting beads in between these raised beads, thus establishing the peyote stitch. These are what I think of as the crenellations on the castle tower or the first row of zipper teeth, right? So it's clear to see where I'm going to go. Put that right there. Okay. The next one, pick up a bead and go through this next bead. Now already you can see when I pulled that they all just kind of lined up and that they're right here in a row. That's exactly what I want. We're about halfway up the side of the cabochon, so it's going to take a few more rows, but they go a lot faster now that this is established. And you can see there's a little thread there. It's not really, really tight. That's okay. It's going to be plenty tight enough, and things will get a little more taut as I go around. But see, there you go. So I'm going to continue these rows with these size 11 delicas until I have the rows that go as tall as my cabochon. Then I'm going to switch to a smaller bead, a size 15. Remember, the higher the number in beads, the smaller the size. When I continue this stitch with that smaller bead, takes a less space, it's going to cinch things in a little tighter, and that's actually going to kind of roll the bezel over the edge of the cabochon. I've seen people that do beaded bezels and they start with a size 8, and then their small row is a size 11, and that works. Just a different look, and I prefer this one. I think this one's a bit more delicate. Sorry, I had to move around so much on that one. So now we've come back to where I started, and I have 2 beads right next to each other here. So that is kind of stepping up to the next row. So you can see here on the purple, you can see my glue is still a little, but that's all going to be fixed very shortly. I think it's probably going to take 2 more rows to come around. So I'm going to go ahead and do those off camera and come back to you when I have the size 11 beads all the way up to the edge of the purple. It's not going to come up to the edge of the black since that's a bit taller, raised up on the cabochon. So probably 2 more rows of the purple. All right, be back in a minute. Okay, so you can see this comes all the way up. This actually comes a little bit over. I could have stopped 1 row sooner, but I just like a little more prominent, wanted a little more of the purple to show. And I put out some of these beads. These are size, well, there's some orphans mixed in there, but for the most part, they're size 15s, they're round, and they're like this dark purpley, almost hematite color. So I liked them because they were kind of halfway between the purple of the background and the black of the raven. We're going to do 1 row around and see how it looks. You can do 2, 3, 4, depends on how far in on the cabochon you want to come, depends on the look you're going for. Now there you can see I missed a stitch. So let's pull that guy off, back the thread out. This is one of the reasons why I do like this Fireline, because it's just so easy to thread the needle again. It doesn't split. It doesn't have to be waxed. I mean, you know, it's tiny, but it has a nice stiffness to it, so it's just easy to push through the needle. There are ways you can fix it if you miss a bead and have to go back into it later, but it's much easier if you catch it when you're only 1 stitch away, so that you can just back right out and fix it right then. Now my original length of thread is still going, so hopefully I'll have enough to finish the bezel. If I didn't, I would go onto the back, tie some secure knots, start a new thread, you know, wind it up to where I had left off, kind of, you know, get it back to that last point, last stitch I'd done. So easy enough to end one and add a new one. but I think my guess was pretty good. Oh, 2 beads. We don't need 2 of those. It's going to be less visible when we go over the black parts of the raven. But you can see right there how it definitely looks like it's rolled over. And I think the colors go together well. I'll probably stop at just the 1 layer, just the 1 row around of 15s, I mean. So that is my starting point. I think I'm going to go halfway around again, just where the purple is, because I think that'll look like a nice frame bordering this piece. As long as I've gone all the way around once, that does its job of kind of cinching it in smaller. And so now if I'm going to do this portion one more time, that's purely because I like the way it looks. Now you can really see how evident it is that it's rolled over the edge of the cabochon. And so now this, it was secure before, but now it is just that much more secure. Yep, and that's where I want to stop. So I am going to kind of hook the needle under the thread there, create a little loop, and thread through that loop just to tie kind of a simple knot there before I go down to the underneath. And now here on the underneath, I can take a little pinch of thread and stiff stuff, loop, knot. And I do that 3 or 4 times. The way I finish off these pieces, you're never going to see this, the back of this and the threads and the knots. So that is that first round, the peyote stitch beaded bezel complete. Now, clearly you can hear my dog acting up in the background, so I'm going to pause and give her a little attention. But part 2 of this video probably won't come out till next week, but then I'm going to do some other beads, some decorative shapes, and embellish the kind of surround of this. Part 3 will be finishing, putting the ultra suede on the back and doing a beaded loop as a bail. So this series, this short series, will show you all of the parts start to finish. But for now, thank you for tuning in, and thank you for your patience with Avalon, the crazy dog bumping the table, just like that. And I will see you again next week for another episode. Hopefully this inspires you, or at least maybe answers some questions that you might have about how this beadwork is done. Thanks for tuning in.